January 5, 1943. The sea near the Solomon Islands churned under a sky painted in smoke and fire. Lieutenant Red Cochrane gripped the fire control director of the cruiser USS Helena, eyes locked on the horizon where 4 Japanese Val-dive bombers sliced through the gray clouds. The air was thick with tension, every heartbeat matching the rhythm of the ship's engines as the bombers began their deadly descent. They came screaming down in perfect formation, their sirens echoing across the Gulf like a symphony of death. The American task force scattered anti-aircraft shells into the sky, but the Japanese pilots were relentless. The Achilles, a New Zealand cruiser, took the brunt of the assault. Flames erupted from its deck as one of the bombs hit true, shaking the surrounding waters. For a moment, time froze. The Allies had been caught off guard again, and everyone knew it. But aboard the Helena, something revolutionary was about to change the tide. Cochrane's hands hovered over the control, his fingers trembling not from fear but anticipation. The ship's gunners loaded a new type of shell, one that didn't rely on impact or timing. Instead, it used something far more advanced, something almost otherworldly for its time: radar. Known as the proximity fuse, this shell could detect its target and detonate at the perfect distance. It was a piece of technology that had the potential to rewrite the mathematics of aerial warfare. The first salvo roared out. The deck shuddered under the recoil as fire and steel screamed into the sky. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, one of the valves exploded mid-air, not from a direct hit, but from the invisible wave of detection that had triggered the fuse. The crew erupted in disbelief. They fired again. Another bomber disintegrated in a burst of light and smoke before it could even release its payload. The impossible had just happened twice. Word spread across the ship like wildfire. The Helena wasn't just firing shells, it was firing the future. The Japanese pilots, masters of precision and discipline, now found themselves hunted by a technology they couldn't see or understand. Their formations broke apart under the barrage as the sky filled with fragments of their once perfect machines. But this wasn't just a victory at sea, it was a turning point in history. Behind every explosion was a story of science, sacrifice, and secrecy. The proximity fuse had been born from desperate collaboration between American and British scientists, working in hidden labs under round-the-clock pressure. It was one of the most closely guarded secrets of World War II, even more classified than the Manhattan Project at the time. If this technology fell into enemy hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. As Helena's guns fell silent, smoke drifted across the waters, and Cochrane looked out at the horizon. What he saw wasn't just a battle won, but the dawn of a new era in warfare. Every nation watching would soon realize that technology was no longer a background player in war, it was the deciding force. But beneath the surface of that triumph lay an unsettling truth. For every innovation that saved lives, another would soon be designed to destroy them even faster. The proximity fuse had given birth to a new kind of battlefield, one where intelligence and machinery would wage war alongside men. And as the Helena sailed through the fading smoke of victory, the question lingered: how long before this same brilliance that changed the tide would begin to drown humanity in its own creation? The sea was calm again, but the world had just stepped into a storm it didn't yet understand. The news of the Helena's success spread across the Pacific like wildfire. Commanders who once doubted the new fuse were now demanding it for every anti-aircraft gun afloat. But few outside the military's inner circle understood just how miraculous the invention truly was, or how close it had come to never existing at all. Months before those shells ever tore through the sky, a quiet race had been unfolding in laboratories buried behind government secrecy. Scientists, mathematicians, and engineers were waging their own invisible war. Among them was Merle Tuve, a physicist at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, who refused to believe that traditional fuses could keep up with the blistering pace of aerial combat. His team worked in cold, dimly lit rooms, testing tiny circuits and radio signals, knowing one wrong connection could detonate a shell right in their hands. They were gambling with both science and their lives. Every test was a balance between genius and catastrophe. In the early days, prototypes exploded prematurely or failed to detonate at all. But the breakthrough came when Tuve's team realized that the key wasn't just building a fuse. It was making one small enough to survive the violent launch of a shell while still being sensitive enough to detect a target. That combination seemed impossible. Yet, through thousands of failures, they created a fuse no bigger than a light bulb that could think for itself in midair. When the military finally received the first batch, skepticism loomed large. Commanders were reluctant to risk combat operations on unproven technology. The Pacific Theater was no place for experiments. Every mistake cost lives. But the attack on Helena changed everything. The proximity fuse had proved its worth not in a lab, but in the crucible of war. Soon, the Allies began using it across the seas and skies. Japanese dive bombers that once terrorized fleets found themselves falling from the clouds in flames. The same technology was then introduced to anti-aircraft batteries defending London, shooting down V-1 flying bombs before they could devastate the city. Civilians, unaware of the science behind their safety, watched from rooftops as the night skies filled with bright bursts. Each explosion a silent triumph of human intellect over destruction. But the fuse's story carried shadows, too. Behind every victory was a moral question that scientists rarely had time to ask. They had created something that could save thousands, yet it also gave militaries unprecedented precision to kill. Tuve and his colleagues often avoided thinking about the human cost. In their minds, the fuse wasn't a weapon, it was a shield. It was built not out of hatred, but survival. Still, war has a way of twisting even noble inventions. The same innovation that protected ships and cities would later inspire guidance systems for more lethal technologies. What started as a defensive miracle became a stepping stone toward missiles that could hunt their targets with surgical precision. Humanity had tasted the power of automated warfare, and there was no turning back. As winter of 1943 turned into spring, the Allies grew stronger. Every engagement told the same story. The enemy's planes burned in the skies long before they could strike. The proximity fuse wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a psychological weapon. Pilots feared it, commanders obsessed over it, and spies sought it at all costs. And yet, amid the triumphs, one thought lingered among the few who truly understood what had been unleashed. Victory through innovation was only temporary. Because for every new invention that gave one side the edge, another was already being developed in secret by the enemy. Science had become both sword and shield, and no one could predict which side it would favor next. The world had entered an age where wars were no longer won by bravery alone, but by brilliance. And brilliance, as history would soon learn, was a double-edged weapon. By late 1944, the proximity fuse had become one of the most valuable secrets in Allied possession. It was so critical that soldiers were instructed to risk their lives protecting it. If a shell failed to detonate, recovery teams were ordered to retrieve it before the enemy could. Losing even a fragment to Axis intelligence could tip the balance of war. In the dense jungles of the Pacific, Marines would comb through smoking craters under sniper fire, searching for unexploded shells, not out of duty alone, but to keep the future from falling into the wrong hands. The Japanese and Germans soon realized that something extraordinary had changed the battlefield. Their planes no longer returned for missions. Their attacks failed with increasing frequency. They suspected radar interference or new anti-aircraft tactics, but the truth eluded them. The proximity fuse remained hidden behind layers of secrecy so deep that even many Allied soldiers using it didn't fully understand what they held. The fuse's development, production, and deployment were separated into compartments. Each scientist, each engineer, knowing only their fragment of the puzzle. It was compartmentalization at a scale never before seen, and it worked flawlessly. The fuse's greatest moment came not at sea, but on land, during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. In the freezing forests of Belgium, Allied forces were trapped under relentless German assault. Artillery units, desperate to hold the line, began using proximity-fused shells for the first time against ground troops. When those rounds exploded just above enemy formations, the effect was devastating. Shrapnel rained down with brutal precision, cutting through ranks that would have survived traditional shellfire. German soldiers, who had once advanced with mechanical discipline, broke formation and fled in panic. The tide of the battle shifted, and the last major German offensive began to crumble. It was then that the proximity fuse earned its place among the greatest technological achievements of the war. ranked alongside radar and the atomic bomb. Yet unlike the bomb, it did not end wars through terror, but through balance. It leveled the skies, allowing the Allies to fight back on equal terms. It gave defenders hope in battles once thought unwinnable. But it also marked a deeper shift, the realization that wars would no longer be decided by soldiers alone. The front lines were now shared by scientists, engineers, and thinkers whose laboratories became as vital as any battlefield. After the war, the story of the proximity fuse was finally declassified, and the public learned of the quiet genius that had helped turn the tide. Newspapers hailed it as the fuse that won the war. But those who had built it didn't celebrate. For them, the invention was a haunting reminder of what innovation in wartime truly meant. Every leap forward in science came with a shadow, a question that no equation could answer. How far could humanity go before progress turned against it? Many of the scientists who worked on the fuse later became advocates for peace. They warned that technology could no longer be seen as good or evil. It was a reflection of those who wielded it. Their words echoed through the dawn of the Cold War, as nations rushed to arm themselves with weapons far deadlier and smarter than anything before. The proximity fuse had shown the world what was possible when brilliance met desperation. Now, it was a race to see whether that brilliance would save humanity or destroy it. And so, as the smoke of war cleared and silence settled over the ravaged world, one truth remained. The victory that began on the decks of the USS Helena was more than just a military triumph. It was a warning, a signal from history that every breakthrough born in the fires of war carries the potential to burn again. Because technology never forgets its purpose, it only waits for humanity to decide what that purpose will be next.